Hey, tonight we're diving into a fascinating journey through one of history's darkest yet most transformative periods. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on the marble steps of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, your bare feet sensing the coolness of stone that has been worn smooth by countless pilgrimage journeys across millennia. The morning mist clings to the mountainside around you, and you can smell the sharp scent of pine resin mixing with the lingering traces of burnt offerings from the night before. Above you, carved into the temple's facade, the words "Know thyself" catch the first golden rays of dawn, and you realize you're about to witness the birth of one of the most complex and contradictory figures in all of mythology. You close your eyes and feel yourself drifting backward through time, through the layers of human understanding, until you arrive at the moment when Leto, heavy with divine pregnancy, searches desperately for a place to give birth to her twins. You are there with her as she wanders from island to island, rejected by fearful mortals who know that Hera's jealous wrath follows close behind. Your feet sink into the warm sand of what will one day be called Delos, a floating island that finally takes pity on the Titan and anchors itself to the sea floor to provide her sanctuary. You watch as Leto grips the sacred palm tree, her knuckles white with the effort of bringing forth not one but two of the most powerful deities the world will ever know. First comes Artemis, swift and sure, and then, as you hold your breath in the pre-dawn darkness, Apollo emerges into existence with a cry that seems to harmonize with the very music of the spheres. The infant Apollo is unlike any child you've ever seen, his skin seeming to glow with an inner light that makes the dawn pale by comparison. As you lean closer, watching this divine baby take his first breaths, you notice that even in these earliest moments, there's something in his eyes that speaks of prophecy, of future knowledge that will both bless and curse him throughout his immortal existence. You reach out instinctively, wanting to touch this miraculous being, and as your fingertips brush against his tiny hand, you feel a shock of recognition that travels through your entire body. This is the God who will embody the very essence of the sun, of music, of healing, of prophecy, and yet also of plague, of sudden death, of unrequited love, and of the terrible burden of knowledge. As Apollo grows before your eyes, transforming from infant to youth to the golden god of classical imagination, you find yourself walking alongside him through the early days of his divine education. You're there in the shadowy groves where he learns the arts of archery from his sister Artemis, watching as his small hands grow steady and sure around the silver bow that will become his signature weapon. The arrows he shoots seem to carry more than mere physical force, they pierce through the veil between mortal and divine understanding, and you realize that every shot Apollo takes is both an act of destruction and creation, ending one thing to make space for another. You follow young Apollo as he ventures to the slopes of Mount Parnassus, where Python, the great earth dragon, guards the oracle that has spoken prophesied since the world was young. The confrontation between god and monster unfolds before you in slow motion, each arrow Apollo releases singing through the air with a sound like distant music. You smell the acrid smoke rising from Python's wounds, hear the earth itself groaning as this ancient creature, this last remnant of the primordial chaos that existed before the Olympian order, finally falls beneath Apollo's relentless assault. As Python's massive body settles into death, you feel the very nature of prophecy shifting around you. No longer will the oracle speak with the raw, untamed voice of the earth, now it will channel Apollo's more refined, more carefully measured wisdom. You kneel beside the dying dragon and place your hand on its massive scaled flank, feeling the last tremors of a power that predates civilization itself, and you understand that Apollo's victory here represents something far more complex than simple good triumphing over evil. This is the moment when rational thought begins to supersede primal instinct, when structured religion starts to replace shamanic chaos, when the masculine principle of order asserts dominance over the feminine principle of wild, untamed knowing. The transformation of Delphi from Python's lair into Apollo's most sacred shrine unfolds around you with dreamlike slowness. You watch as the god himself oversees the construction of his temple, his golden hands guiding every measurement, his voice humming melodies that seem to help the massive stone blocks settle into perfect harmony with one another. The Pythia, Python's successor as the voice of divine prophecy, sits before you on her tripod above the sacred chasm, and you can see how she struggles with the intoxicating vapors that rise from the earth's depths. Her words, when they come, are fragmented and strange, requiring Apollo's priests to translate them into the carefully structured prophecies that will guide Greek civilization for over 1,000 years. You realize, as you watch this ancient ritual unfold, that Apollo himself is caught between two worlds, the wild, unstructured realm of pure divine inspiration and the ordered, rational world that his very presence helps to create. As you walk through the marble corridors of Apollo's temple, your footsteps echoing in the sacred silence, you begin to understand the profound loneliness that defines this god's existence. Unlike his father Zeus, who revels in conquest and domination, or his brother Ares, who finds joy in the chaos of battle, Apollo is cursed with the burden of perfect perception. He sees not just what is, but what will be, and this knowledge isolates him in ways that even other gods cannot fully comprehend. You sit beside him in his private chambers, watching as he crafts a lyre from tortoise shell and golden strings, and you can see how music becomes his attempt to translate the inexpressible longing of divine consciousness into something that mortal minds might grasp. Each note he plays carries within it the weight of cosmic understanding, the harmony that underlies all existence, and yet also the melancholy recognition that such beauty can never be fully shared or understood by those who most need to hear it. The story of Apollo's first love, the nymph Daphne, unfolds before you with all the tragic inevitability of a perfectly composed symphony. You're there in the moment when Eros, still smarting from Apollo's mockery of his archery skills, draws his bow and releases two arrows, one golden arrow that pierces Apollo's heart with irresistible desire, and one leaden arrow that fills Daphne with equally irresistible revulsion. You run alongside Apollo as he pursues the fleeing nymph through forests that seem to bend and shift around them, your lungs burning with the effort of keeping pace with divine desperation. Daphne's terror is palpable as she runs, her bare feet bleeding against the rough forest floor, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she prays to her father, the river god Peneus, for deliverance from this unwanted attention. You watch in horror and fascination as her prayers are answered in the most literal way possible, her skin hardening into bark, her hair transforming into leaves, her arms reaching skyward as they become branches. Apollo's anguished cry as he embraces the laurel tree that was once his beloved echoes through the forest, and you understand that this moment establishes a pattern that will define all of his romantic relationships. The closer he comes to earthly love, the more it transforms into something beautiful but unreachable. The transformation of Daphne becomes Apollo's first great lesson in the price of divine love, and you find yourself walking beside him through the centuries that follow as he grapples with this impossible paradox. You're present when he falls in love with Hyacinthus, the beautiful Spartan prince whose athleticism and grace seem to embody everything Apollo values about mortal achievement. Their relationship unfolds before you like a perfect Greek tragedy, filled with moments of pure joy that only make the inevitable conclusion more heartbreaking. You watch them compete together in discus throwing, Apollo deliberately moderating his divine strength to make the contest fair, his laughter ringing across the gymnasium as Hyacinthus proves surprisingly competitive. The moment of tragedy arrives with devastating swiftness. Apollo's discus, caught by a jealous wind sent by Zephyrus, strikes Hyacinthus in the head with a sound like thunder. You kneel beside the dying youth as Apollo cradles him, watching divine tears fall like liquid gold onto mortal flesh, and you witness the birth of the hyacinth flower from Hyacinthus's spilled blood. The petals, marked with what looks like the Greek letters AIAI, a cry of lamentation, serve as an eternal reminder of love's fragility in the face of divine power. Your journey through Apollo's romantic tragedies continues as you find yourself present at his courtship of Cassandra, the Trojan princess whose beauty is matched only by her intelligence and spiritual sensitivity. The scene unfolds in the sacred precinct of Troy's temple to Apollo, where Cassandra serves as a priestess and where her prophetic abilities first begin to manifest. You watch Apollo approach her with unprecedented gentleness, recognizing in her a mortal who might actually understand the burden of prophecy he carries. Their courtship is unlike any of his previous attempts at love. Here is intellectual communion alongside physical attraction, a meeting of minds that seems to promise the companionship Apollo has always craved. You're there in the moment when Apollo offers Cassandra the gift of prophecy in exchange for her love, and you see the genuine hope in the god's golden eyes as she accepts both the power and, seemingly, him. The betrayal, when it comes, cuts deeper than any physical wound. You watch Cassandra's face as she realizes the true cost of divine love, see her pull away from Apollo's embrace with a mixture of fear and disgust that transforms her beautiful features into something cold and distant. Apollo's rage at this rejection manifests not in violence but in a curse more subtle and terrible than death, Cassandra will retain her prophetic abilities, but no one will ever believe her prophecies. You stand beside her as she speaks her first cursed prediction, warning the Trojans about the wooden horse that will bring their destruction, and you feel the terrible weight of truth that falls on deaf ears. Understanding that Apollo's revenge has created a special kind of hell for both the prophet and those who need her warnings, the complexity of Apollo's relationship with his own prophetic powers becomes clearer as you witness his interactions with other oracles throughout the ancient world. You find yourself in the underground chambers beneath the temple of Apollo at Claros, watching as the god's priest drinks from a sacred spring and immediately begins to speak in verses of perfect hexameter, answering questions that haven't even been fully formulated yet. The priest's face takes on an otherworldly serenity as Apollo's consciousness flows through him, but you can see the physical toll this divine possession exacts, the rapid aging, the trembling hands, the eyes that seem to look through rather than at the world around them. You realize that Apollo's gift of prophecy is simultaneously the most precious and most dangerous blessing he can bestow, offering knowledge of the future while destroying the mortal vessel that receives it. This paradox seems to reflect something fundamental about Apollo's nature. He is a god of both healing and plague, of both order and destruction, embodying the principle that all divine gifts carry within them the seeds of their own opposite. As you follow Apollo through his interactions with other Olympian deities, you begin to see how his role as the god of rational thought and measured action often puts him at odds with the more chaotic aspects of divine nature. You're present during the great debate between Apollo and Dionysus over the proper way to inspire mortal creativity, watching as these two very different sons of Zeus argue their respective philosophies in the marble halls of Olympus. Apollo's position is clear and carefully reasoned. True art comes from discipline, from the careful application of learned technique to express universal truths. His lyre produces melodies of mathematical precision, each note perfectly placed to create harmonies that reflect the cosmic order underlying all existence. Dionysus, by contrast, argues for the wild abandon of ecstatic experience, for the breaking down of barriers between conscious and unconscious, rational and irrational. His music is improvisational, primal, designed to strip away the careful constructions of civilized thought and reveal the raw life force that pulses beneath. You watch this debate unfold over decades, sometimes taking the form of philosophical discussion, sometimes expressing itself through competing festivals and religious practices in the mortal world below. What becomes clear to you is that Apollo and Dionysus are not truly opponents but complementary aspects of a single truth, that human consciousness requires both structure and chaos, both Apollonian order and Dionysian release, to achieve its full potential. Your understanding of Apollo's complexity deepens as you witness his role in the Trojan War, where his actions reveal the often contradictory nature of divine justice. You stand on the walls of Troy as Apollo guides Paris's arrow toward Achilles' vulnerable heel, and you feel the god's own conflicted emotions as he watches the greatest of Greek warriors fall. Apollo's support for the Trojans is not born of simple favoritism but of a complex web of obligations and sympathies. He has been honored in Troy, his priests respected, his temples maintained with proper reverence. Yet you can see that he takes no joy in the destruction that follows, understanding that the fall of Troy represents not just the defeat of one city but the end of an entire age of heroes. You're present when Apollo confronts his sister Artemis on the battlefield, their argument over divine intervention echoing across the plains as mortal armies clash below them. The sight of these two perfect beings, so alike in their golden beauty yet so different in their approaches to divine responsibility, arguing while mortals die in their shadows, crystallizes for you the essential tragedy of the relationship between gods and humans in the ancient world. The story of Niobe provides another window into Apollo's complex relationship with divine justice and mortal hubris. You find yourself in the royal palace of Thebes, watching as Queen Niobe boasts to her assembled court about her 14 children, 7 sons and 7 daughters, each one more beautiful and accomplished than the last. Her pride is not merely personal but explicitly comparative. She declares herself more blessed than Leto, who bore only 2 children, Apollo and Artemis. You can feel the dangerous resonance of these words as they echo through the divine realms, challenging not just Leto's maternal pride but the fundamental order that places gods above mortals in the cosmic hierarchy. The response, when it comes, is swift and merciless. You watch in horror as Apollo and Artemis descend from Olympus like twin storms, their silver bows singing death across the palace courtyards. One by one, Niobe's children fall, each arrow finding its mark with divine precision. The sons die first, cut down as they practice their athletics in the gymnasium, their perfect young bodies crumpling like broken flowers. Then the daughters, caught as they weave at their looms or dance in the garden, each death a masterpiece of tragic timing. You kneel beside Niobe as she cradles the last of her children, watching her transformation from proud queen to a figure of ultimate maternal grief. Her tears, flowing endlessly as she turns to stone, become a permanent monument to the price of challenging divine authority, yet you sense Apollo's own anguish at this necessary demonstration of celestial power. The healing aspect of Apollo's nature reveals itself to you through his role as the father of Asclepius, the god of medicine. You're present at the birth of this divine physician, watching as Apollo rescues the unborn child from his dying mother's womb, and you understand that this traumatic beginning shapes both Asclepius's destiny and Apollo's own understanding of the relationship between life and death. You follow Apollo as he personally trains his son in the healing arts, teaching him to see beyond the surface symptoms to the underlying imbalances that create disease. Their lessons take place in sacred groves where every plant has medicinal properties, where the very air seems charged with therapeutic potential. You watch Asclepius grow from student to master, his healing abilities eventually surpassing even Apollo's own, and you feel the complex mixture of pride and concern that fills the father god as he sees his son's power develop. The tragedy comes, as it always does with Apollo's loves, through the very perfection of what he has created. Asclepius becomes so skilled at healing that he begins to resurrect the dead, disrupting the fundamental order that separates mortal from immortal existence. You're there when Zeus's thunderbolt strikes down Asclepius, and you witness Apollo's grief transform into rage so pure and terrible that he slaughters the Cyclopes who forged the weapon that killed his son. This act of divine vengeance costs Apollo dearly. Zeus sentences him to a year of servitude among mortals, stripping him temporarily of his divine powers and forcing him to experience firsthand the vulnerability and mortality that he has observed from Olympian heights. Your journey with Apollo through his period of mortal servitude provides unprecedented insight into the god's character as he serves King Admetus as a simple shepherd. You walk beside him through the rolling hills of Thessaly, watching as he tends flocks with the same careful attention he once devoted to cosmic harmonies. The other shepherds accept him as one of their own, unaware that their quiet, golden-haired companion is a god in exile. You see how this experience humbles Apollo in ways that centuries of divine existence never could: the daily struggle to find adequate pasture, the anxiety over wolves and weather, the simple satisfaction of a job well done under difficult circumstances. Most importantly, you witness Apollo's growing appreciation for King Admetus, whose kindness to a seemingly powerless servant reveals a nobility of character that impresses even Olympian sensibilities. When Apollo's year of service ends and his divine powers return, his first act is to grant Admetus a precious gift, the promise that when the king's destined death approaches, he will be allowed to live if someone else volunteers to die in his place. This gift, born of genuine gratitude and affection, sets in motion another of those tragic chains of consequence that seem to follow Apollo's benevolent intentions. You're there when Admetus's young wife Alcestis volunteers to take her husband's place in death, and you feel Apollo's anguish as he realizes that his well-intentioned gift has created another impossible situation where love and loss intertwine in devastating ways. The musical competitions that Apollo judges reveal another facet of his complex personality, his deep appreciation for artistic excellence combined with his sometimes harsh punishment of those who challenge divine authority in creative matters. You find yourself present at the famous contest between Apollo and Marsyas, the satyr who dared to claim that his flute playing could match the god's lyre. The competition unfolds before you with all the formal ceremony of a legal trial, with the muses serving as judges and representatives from across the known world gathering to witness this unprecedented challenge to divine supremacy in the arts. Marsyas plays first, his double flute producing melodies that seem to capture the very essence of wild, untamed nature, the sound of wind through forests, the gurgling of mountain streams, the primal rhythms that pulse beneath all conscious thought. His music is undeniably beautiful, speaking to something deep and ancient in all who hear it, and for a moment you wonder if perhaps mortal artistry might indeed match divine perfection. Then Apollo begins to play, and you understand immediately that the contest was never really in doubt. His lyre produces not just melody but harmony, not just sound but meaning, weaving together threads of mathematical precision and emotional truth in ways that seem to reveal the very structure of reality itself. Yet victory brings Apollo no joy, for the rules of such contests demand that the winner may do whatever he wishes with the loser. The flaying of Marsyas that follows is one of the most disturbing episodes in Apollo's long history, a reminder that divine justice, no matter how technically correct, can manifest in ways that seem cruel beyond mortal understanding. As you continue your journey through Apollo's mythic existence, you begin to notice the recurring theme of transformation that runs through all his relationships with mortals. Unlike gods who simply use and discard their human lovers, Apollo seems compelled to immortalize those he cares about, even when that immortalization comes at a terrible cost. You witness his love affair with Clytie, the ocean nymph whose devotion to the sun god becomes so consuming that she can do nothing but sit and watch his daily journey across the sky. Day after day you sit beside her, feeling the sun's heat on your face as she refuses food, water, or shelter, her love having transformed into an obsession that literally roots her to the earth. When Apollo finally takes pity on her deteriorating condition, her transformation into a sunflower seems almost merciful. At least now she can follow his path across the heavens without destroying her physical form, even though her consciousness remains trapped in an endless cycle of longing and unfulfillment. The story of Cyparissus reveals yet another variation on Apollo's tragic pattern of transformative love. You find yourself in the sacred groves of Cartia, watching as the beautiful youth tends his beloved pet stag, a creature so tame and gentle that it seems more like a dog than a wild animal. Apollo's attraction to Cyparissus is immediate and powerful, but unlike his previous pursuits, this time the god approaches with unprecedented patience and gentleness, perhaps having learned something from his earlier failures. You watch their relationship develop slowly, built on shared appreciation for natural beauty and quiet companionship rather than desperate passion. The tragedy, when it comes, is entirely accidental. Cyparissus throws his javelin at what he believes is a wild animal moving in the underbrush, only to discover that he has mortally wounded his beloved stag. His grief is so overwhelming that no amount of comfort from Apollo can ease it, and his repeated pleas for eternal mourning finally move the god to grant his wish. The transformation of Cyparissus into a cypress tree, forever associated with mourning and death, represents perhaps Apollo's most selfless act of love, allowing his beloved to find peace in a form that expresses his essential nature rather than trying to force him into the shape of divine desire. Your exploration of Apollo's relationships with mortals eventually leads you to consider his role as a father figure, both literal and metaphorical, to some of the greatest heroes and artists in Greek mythology. You're present at the birth of Orpheus, watching as Apollo places his own lyre in the infant's tiny hands and witnesses the first stirrings of the musical genius that will make Orpheus the greatest mortal musician who ever lived. The pride Apollo takes in his son's achievements is evident as you follow Orpheus through his legendary career, watching him charm wild beasts, move stones and trees with his melodies, and even convince the gods of the underworld to release his beloved Eurydice from death. Yet even this relationship is touched by the tragic irony that seems to follow all of Apollo's deepest affections. When Orpheus loses Eurydice a second time through his inability to trust in divine promise, and subsequently renounces the love of women in favor of an exclusively masculine devotion that recalls Apollo's own relationship with Hyacinthus, you see how the son has inherited not just his father's musical gifts but also his capacity for transformative grief. The philosophical implications of Apollo's nature become clearer as you contemplate his role as the god of the Delphic maxims, those brief, cryptic phrases that supposedly contain the essence of Greek wisdom. Know thyself takes on deeper meaning when you consider it as advice from a god who is himself divided between rational order and prophetic madness, between healing compassion and destructive vengeance. Nothing in excess speaks to the terrible consequences you've witnessed when divine power operates without restraint, whether in love, in justice, or in artistic competition. Shorty Brings Ruin reflects Apollo's own experience with the weight of prophetic knowledge, the way that certainty about the future can become a burden too heavy for any consciousness to bear. You realize that these maxims are not just philosophical abstractions but distillations of divine experience, lessons learned through millennia of complex relationships with mortals who could never fully understand the cosmic forces they were dealing with. As your journey through Apollo's mythology draws toward its close, you find yourself reflecting on the fundamental loneliness that defines this god's existence. Unlike Zeus, who can find satisfaction in power and conquest, or Aphrodite, who can lose herself in the endless varieties of love and desire, Apollo seems cursed with a level of self-awareness that makes genuine contentment impossible. His prophetic abilities ensure that he knows the outcome of every relationship before it begins, every triumph shadowed by knowledge of its inevitable corruption or loss. His role as the god of rational thought means that he cannot lose himself in the kind of ecstatic abandon that might provide temporary relief from the burden of consciousness. Even his music, beautiful as it is, serves primarily as a means of expressing the inexpressible rather than escaping from it. Yet there is something profoundly moving about Apollo's persistent attempts to connect with mortal consciousness despite the tragic outcomes that seem to follow his every effort. Each new love, each attempt to share his gifts with humanity, represents a kind of divine optimism that refuses to be extinguished by repeated disappointment. In this sense, Apollo embodies something essentially heroic about consciousness itself, the determination to continue seeking meaning and connection even in the face of cosmic indifference. His transformations of lost loves into eternal forms, laurel trees, flowers, constellations, can be seen not just as monuments to divine selfishness but as attempts to preserve something beautiful from the inevitable dissolution that awaits all mortal things. The sun is setting now as your mythic journey draws to a close, and you find yourself once again standing on the marble steps of the temple at Delphi, the same steps where this exploration began. The evening light catches the carved letters of Know Thyself with a golden radiance that seems to pulse within a meaning, and you understand that this phrase contains within it the entire tragedy and triumph of conscious existence. To know oneself truly is to become aware of one's limitations as well as one's capabilities, to understand the price of every gift and the shadow that accompanies every light. Apollo's mythology suggests that even gods are subject to this fundamental law of consciousness, that awareness brings with it an unavoidable burden of responsibility and loss. As darkness falls and the first stars appear in the Mediterranean sky, you feel the peaceful exhaustion that comes at the end of any great journey of discovery. The complexity of Apollo's character, his simultaneous embodiment of seemingly contradictory principles, no longer seems like a flaw in ancient storytelling but like a profound insight into the nature of consciousness itself. We are all, in our own small ways, divided beings, caught between our rational minds and our emotional hearts, between our desire for order and our need for transcendence, between our love for what is mortal and our longing for what is eternal. The myths of Apollo remind us that these divisions are not problems to be solved but paradoxes to be lived, tensions that generate the very energy that makes consciousness possible. In his endless cycle of love and loss, creation and destruction, healing and harm, Apollo shows us that the price of awareness is the knowledge of impermanence, but that this knowledge need not lead to despair. Instead, it can inspire us to value more deeply the brief moments of beauty and connection that punctuate our existence, to find meaning not in the permanence of our achievements but in the sincerity of our attempts to create something worthy of preservation. But your journey through Apollo's divine existence is far from over, for there are depths to this god's nature that require even more careful exploration. You find yourself transported to the island of Delos once more, but this time you are witnessing Apollo's return to his birthplace as a fully mature deity, coming to establish the great festival that will honor his mother Leto and celebrate the divine twins' miraculous birth. The island has been transformed since that desperate night when Leto sought sanctuary here. Now it gleams with marble temples and bronze statues, its sacred palm tree surrounded by offerings from grateful pilgrims who come from across the Mediterranean to pay homage to the god of light. You walk among the festival crowds, feeling the excitement and devotion that radiates from thousands of worshippers who have traveled vast distances to participate in this celebration of divine birth and triumph. The Delian festival reveals another aspect of Apollo's complex relationship with mortal worship, for here you see him not as the tragic lover or the burden prophet, but as the joyful god of community celebration and shared cultural identity. The competitions that take place in his honor, musical contests, athletic events, dramatic performances, showcase the very best of human achievement, and you can see how Apollo takes genuine pleasure in witnessing mortal excellence that approaches, even briefly, the perfection of divine creation. You stand beside him as he watches a young rhapsode recite the entire Iliad from memory, the god's golden eyes reflecting appreciation for the intricate beauty of human storytelling, the way mere mortals can take the raw materials of experience and transform them into something that transcends their individual limitations. This is Apollo at his most benevolent, using his divine authority not to punish or transform but to inspire and elevate, creating spaces where human potential can flourish under divine protection. Yet even in these moments of celebration, you sense the underlying tension that defines Apollo's existence. As you move through the festival crowds, you notice how the worshippers approach the god statue with a mixture of love and fear, their prayers combining gratitude for his blessings with desperate pleas that they might avoid his wrath. They understand instinctively what you have learned through your long journey with this deity, that Apollo's gifts always come with a price, that his attention, however benevolent, carries within it the potential for transformation that might be more than mortal consciousness can bear. You watch a group of mothers offering prayers for their children's health and safety, and you see in their faces the recognition that to attract Apollo's notice is to risk everything they hold dear, even as they desperately need his protection. The duality of Apollo's nature becomes even more apparent as you witness his role in the great plague that strikes the Greek army at Troy, the opening crisis of the Iliad that sets the entire epic in motion. You find yourself standing among the Greek ships drawn up on the beach before Troy's walls, breathing air thick with the smoke of funeral pyres as Apollo's silver arrows rain death upon the soldiers who have dishonored his priest crises. The god himself moves through the camp like a dark wind, his usual golden radiance dimmed to something terrible and implacable, his music replaced by the whistle of plague-carrying arrows that find their marks with divine precision. You feel the terror of the Greek soldiers as they realize that their military might means nothing against divine wrath, that all their bronze weapons and tactical skill cannot protect them from a god who has decided they deserve punishment. But you also witness the moment when Agamemnon finally agrees to return Chryseis to her father, and you see how quickly Apollo's wrath transforms back into benevolent protection. The plague ceases as suddenly as it began, the god's arrows now carrying healing rather than death, his presence shifting from terrifying nemesis to gracious protector. This rapid transformation reveals something crucial about Apollo's nature. He is not a god of sustained malevolence but of precise justice, dispensing punishment only as long as it serves to correct imbalance and restore proper relationship between divine and human realms. Yet the speed of this transformation also highlights the precarious position of mortals in relation to divine power, the way that human fate can shift from prosperity to disaster and back again based on actions whose cosmic significance might not be immediately apparent to those who perform them. Your exploration of Apollo's role as a plague-bringer leads you deeper into the complex relationship between disease and divinity in ancient understanding. You find yourself in the sacred precinct of Apollo Smintheus, the mouse god whose dominion over small creatures extends to his power over the diseases they carry. Here you witness rituals designed not just to cure existing illness but to prevent future outbreaks, communities offering elaborate sacrifices to ensure that Apollo's arrows continue to fly past them rather than finding targets in their bodies. The priests who serve this aspect of the god must maintain a delicate balance, acknowledging Apollo's power to bring disease while celebrating his greater power to heal and protect. You watch them perform purification ceremonies that seem to cleanse not just individual bodies but entire communities, washing away the spiritual contamination that Apollo's prophetic sight identifies as the true source of physical illness. The healing sanctuaries dedicated to Apollo reveal yet another dimension of his divine nature, places where his role as father of Asclepius manifests in direct therapeutic intervention in mortal suffering. You find yourself at the great healing center of Epidaurus, walking among invalids who have traveled from across the known world seeking divine cure for ailments that human medicine cannot touch. The incubation chambers where pilgrims sleep in hopes of receiving healing dreams are filled with a mixture of desperation and hope that seems to create its own sacred atmosphere. You lie down beside a young woman whose blindness has persisted since birth, feeling her trembling anticipation as she prepares to spend the night in Apollo's presence, hoping that his divine light might somehow penetrate the darkness that has always defined her world. The healing dreams that come to suppliants in these sacred places reveal Apollo's gentler approach to transformation, his ability to change mortal condition through means other than the dramatic metamorphoses that characterize his romantic relationships. You witness the blind woman's dream as Apollo appears to her not in his usual golden splendor but as a kindly physician whose hands glow with soft, therapeutic light. His touch upon her closed eyelids is gentle beyond description, and when she awakens to find her sight restored, her tears of joy seem to catch and reflect the morning sunlight streaming through the sanctuary windows. Yet even this benevolent intervention carries its cost. You see how her newfound vision overwhelms her with stimuli she has never learned to process, how the gift of sight brings its own form of suffering alongside its obvious blessing. The philosophical schools that claim Apollo as their patron reveal his role as the divine source of rational inquiry and systematic thought. You find yourself in the academy at Athens, listening as Plato expounds upon the relationship between earthly beauty and divine perfection, his words carrying the unmistakable influence of Apollonian ideals about the mathematical harmony that underlies all existence. The students gathered around the great philosopher hang on his every word as he explains how the visible world is merely a shadow of eternal forms, how the philosopher's task is to use reason to ascend from the cave of sensory illusion toward the blinding light of pure truth. In Plato's teaching, you recognize Apollo's own struggle to communicate divine knowledge through the limited medium of mortal understanding, the way that perfect truth must always be filtered through imperfect vessels. But you also witness the debates that arise within these philosophical circles about the proper relationship between rational thought and divine inspiration. Some students argue for the supremacy of logical analysis, claiming that Apollo's true gift to humanity is the capacity for systematic reasoning that can unlock the secrets of natural and moral law. Others insist that reason alone is insufficient, that the god's prophetic madness represents a higher form of knowledge that transcends the limitations of purely logical thought. You listen to these arguments with growing understanding that they reflect the fundamental tension within Apollo's own nature, his embodiment of both structured rationality and ecstatic revelation. And you realize that any philosophy that claims his patronage must somehow account for both aspects of divine truth. Or artistic traditions associated with Apollo reveal another facet of his complex relationship with human creativity. You find yourself in the workshop of Phidias, the great sculptor whose masterworks define the classical ideal of divine beauty. You watch him work on a statue of Apollo, his skilled hands gradually revealing the god's perfect proportions from a block of pentelic marble that seems to glow within a light. Every measurement is calculated according to mathematical ratios that Phidias believes reflect cosmic harmony, yet the finished work transcends mere geometric precision to capture something of Apollo's essential nature, the serene confidence of perfect knowledge combined with the melancholy awareness of isolation that such knowledge brings. As you run your fingers over the smooth marble surface, you feel how the sculptor has managed to express in stone the paradox of divine consciousness that you have been exploring throughout your journey. The theatrical festivals held in Apollo's honor provide yet another window into his relationship with human artistic expression. You find yourself in the great theater at Delphi, watching as tragic actors perform the story of Oedipus, that ultimate tale of the collision between human will and divine foreknowledge. The irony is almost overwhelming. Here, in Apollo's own sacred precinct, mortals enact the story of a man destroyed by trying to escape the very prophecy that Apollo's oracle delivered, their performance serving simultaneously as entertainment, religious ritual, and philosophical meditation on the nature of fate and free will. You see how the audience members weep openly as Oedipus realizes the full horror of his situation, their tears acknowledging not just the character's suffering but their own vulnerability to forces beyond mortal comprehension or control. Apollo's presence seems to permeate every aspect of the performance, from the precise meter of the tragic verse to the mathematical relationships that govern the theater's acoustic properties. The actor playing Oedipus speaks his final speeches with a voice that seems to channel something of the god's own prophetic authority, his words carrying the weight of cosmic truth even as they describe purely human anguish. You realize that tragedy, as an art form, represents Apollo's most sophisticated attempt to help mortals understand their relationship to divine power, not through direct revelation, which would be too overwhelming for human consciousness to bear, but through the mediated experience of witnessing fictional characters grapple with the same fundamental questions that define all conscious existence. The mystery cults that incorporate Apollonian elements reveal yet another dimension of the gods' influence on human spiritual development. You find yourself initiated into the sacred rites at Delphi that few mortals ever witness, ceremonies that attempt to recreate the experience of prophetic inspiration in controlled, ritual contexts. The preparation involves weeks of purification, dietary restrictions, and meditation practices designed to attune the initiate's consciousness to divine frequencies that normally remain beyond mortal perception. As you undergo these preparatory disciplines, you feel your ordinary awareness gradually shifting, becoming more sensitive to subtle currents of meaning and significance that usually remain hidden beneath the surface of everyday experience. The climactic moment of initiation takes place in the innermost sanctuary of Apollo's temple, where you drink from the same sacred spring that provides the Pythia with her prophetic visions. The effect is unlike anything you have ever experienced, not the violent possession that characterizes the oracle's trances, but a gentle expansion of consciousness that allows you to perceive the underlying patterns that connect all things. You see how individual events are woven together into larger narratives, how personal choices ripple outward to influence cosmic harmonies, how the apparent randomness of existence masks deeper structures of meaning that only divine perspective can fully comprehend. For a brief moment, you understand what it might be like to possess Apollo's gift of prophecy, to see not just what is but what must inevitably come to pass. Yet even this carefully controlled taste of divine knowledge comes with its own burden. As the vision fades and ordinary consciousness returns, you find yourself struggling with the weight of what you have seen, the terrible responsibility that comes with even partial knowledge of future events. You understand now why Apollo's oracles speak in riddles and ambiguities, not to obscure the truth but to protect those who receive it from the full impact of prophetic certainty. The gods' cryptic utterances are acts of mercy as much as revelation, offering guidance while preserving the illusion of free will that makes mortal existence bearable. Your journey through Apollo's mythic landscape eventually brings you to consideration of his role in the great cultural transitions that marked the end of the Bronze Age and the beginning of what we now call classical antiquity. You witness his gradual displacement of older chthonic deities, watching as his rational, solar worship slowly but inexorably replaces the more primitive earth-based religions that once dominated Mediterranean spirituality. This is not a violent conquest but a subtle transformation, as Apollo's priests incorporate existing sacred sites and rituals into their own more structured theological framework. You see how local goddesses become aspects of Apollo's divine family, how ancient oracles are reinterpreted as manifestations of his prophetic power, how seasonal festivals are redesigned to reflect his solar symbolism rather than their original agricultural meanings. This process of religious evolution reveals something important about Apollo's essential nature. He is a god of transition, of the movement from one form of consciousness to another. His mythology consistently involves transformation, whether the literal metamorphoses of his lovers or the more subtle changes he brings to human understanding of divine nature. You realize that Apollo's role in Greek religion reflects a broader cultural shift from intuitive, emotional ways of relating to the sacred toward more intellectual, systematized approaches that would eventually give birth to philosophy, science, and the other disciplines that define rational inquiry. Yet this transition is never complete, and you see how Apollo himself embodies the tension between old and new ways of understanding divine reality. His prophetic madness connects him to the shamanic traditions that his rational worship supposedly replaced, while his role as a god of music and poetry maintains links to the ecstatic, non-rational forms of spiritual experience that systematic theology struggles to accommodate. In this sense, Apollo serves as a bridge between different modes of human consciousness, helping mortals navigate the transition from mythic to rational thought without completely severing their connections to more primitive forms of spiritual awareness. The seasonal festivals dedicated to Apollo reveal how his worship attempts to maintain this delicate balance between rational structure and ecstatic experience. You find yourself participating in the Thargelia, celebrating Apollo's purification of Athens and his role as protector of the city's spiritual health. The rituals combine carefully prescribed ceremonies with moments of spontaneous celebration, formal hymns with impromptu dancing, solemn sacrifices with joyful feasting. You see how the festival serves multiple functions simultaneously, honoring the god, strengthening community bonds, providing cathartic release for accumulated tensions, and reaffirming the cosmic order that places divine authority above human will. The participants in these festivals seem to understand intuitively that they are enacting something more complex than simple worship. Their reverence for Apollo carries within it recognition of their own need for the kind of consciousness he represents, the ability to perceive pattern and meaning in apparently chaotic experience, to find beauty and harmony even in the midst of suffering and loss. You watch elderly women weave garlands for the god statue with the same careful attention they once brought to preparing their children's funeral shrouds, their weathered hands creating beauty from simple materials while their eyes reflect knowledge of all the transformations they have witnessed and endured. As your exploration of Apollo's nature draws toward its conclusion, you find yourself contemplating the god's relationship with time itself, his unique position as a deity who embodies both eternal stability and constant change. His daily journey across the sky represents the fundamental rhythm that structures mortal existence, yet his prophetic knowledge transcends the linear progression of past, present, and future that defines human experience. You realize that Apollo's apparent contradictions may reflect the paradoxical nature of time itself, how it appears to flow steadily forward from a mortal perspective while remaining eternally present from a divine viewpoint. This temporal paradox helps explain the tragic quality that characterizes so many of Apollo's relationships with mortals. His lovers are doomed not by divine malevolence but by the fundamental incompatibility between mortal time and divine eternality. Daphne flees not just Apollo's desire but the terrible prospect of being trapped forever in a single moment of experience, while Hyacinthus dies because mortal beauty cannot sustain itself indefinitely in the presence of eternal perfection. The transformations that conclude these relationships represent Apollo's attempts to preserve what he loves by removing it from the flow of linear time, creating permanent monuments to transient beauty that can endure beyond the natural span of mortal existence. Yet these transformations also represent a kind of failure, for they preserve form while sacrificing the living consciousness that gave that form its meaning. The laurel tree that was once Daphne retains her beauty but loses her capacity for choice and growth, while the hyacinth flower carries Hyacinthus's name but none of his personality or potential. You begin to understand that Apollo's tragedy lies not in his inability to love mortals but in his inability to love them as mortals. His divine nature compels him to seek permanence in relationships that derive their poignancy precisely from their impermanence. The philosophical implications of this temporal paradox extend far beyond Apollo's personal relationships to encompass his role as a god of prophecy and rational thought. Knowledge of the future, you realize, is fundamentally incompatible with genuine choice and spontaneity. To know what will happen is to live in a universe where true novelty becomes impossible. Apollo's burden as a prophetic deity is that his perfect knowledge isolates him from the very experiences that make consciousness meaningful for mortals. He can observe but not truly participate in the drama of choice and consequence that defines human existence, forever separated from the uncertainty and risk that give mortal decisions their moral weight. This isolation helps explain Apollo's persistent attempts to connect with human consciousness through music, art, and religious ritual. These forms of expression allow him to communicate something of divine experience without completely overwhelming mortal awareness, creating bridges between different levels of consciousness that preserve the essential mystery while offering glimpses of greater understanding. The beauty of Apollo's music lies not just in its perfect harmony but in its ability to evoke in mortal listeners a sense of cosmic order that they can feel even if they cannot fully comprehend it. As you prepare to conclude your long journey through Apollo's mythic existence, you find yourself once again standing in the sacred precinct at Delphi, but now the scene is bathed in the soft light of early evening rather than the harsh clarity of noon. The shadows cast by the temple columns seem deeper and more mysterious, suggesting depths of meaning that daylight revelation cannot fully illuminate. The tourists and pilgrims have departed, leaving you alone with the ancient stones and the eternal presence they were built to honor. The silence here is profound but not empty. It seems to vibrate with accumulated centuries of human seeking, all the questions that have been brought to this place by mortals desperate for divine guidance in navigating the complexities of conscious existence. You can almost hear the echoes of countless consultations with the oracle, the hopes and fears that have been poured out before Apollo's altar, the mixture of gratitude and disappointment that has followed the god's characteristically ambiguous responses. This silence contains within it all the unspoken longing that drives human beings to seek connection with something greater than themselves, even when that connection comes at a cost they can barely comprehend. The inscription "Know Thyself" carved into the temple wall takes on new significance as you reflect on everything you have witnessed during your journey with Apollo. The phrase no longer seems like simple philosophical advice but like a warning about the price of consciousness itself. To truly know oneself is to become aware of one's own limitations and mortality, to understand the gap between aspiration and achievement that defines all finite existence. Yet it is also to recognize the spark of divine awareness that makes such self-knowledge possible, the capacity for reflection and choice that connects mortal consciousness to the cosmic intelligence that Apollo represents. In the growing darkness, you feel the presence of all those who have sought Apollo's guidance throughout the centuries, philosophers grappling with questions of truth and meaning, artists struggling to express the inexpressible, lovers trying to understand the nature of their deepest attachments, rulers seeking wisdom for governing others when they can barely govern themselves. Each of these seekers has come to Apollo with their own particular need, yet all have been united by the fundamental human desire to transcend the limitations of individual perspective and connect with something larger and more enduring than personal experience. Apollo's responses to these seekers have rarely provided the kind of clear, practical guidance they hoped to receive. Instead, his oracles have offered paradoxes and riddles that force questioners to deepen their own understanding rather than simply following divine instructions. This pattern reveals something crucial about the god's nature. He is not interested in controlling human behavior but in catalyzing human growth, not in providing easy answers but in helping mortals develop the capacity to ask better questions. The night air carries the scent of wild thyme and cypress as you make your final descent from Apollo's temple, your footsteps echoing softly on stones worn smooth by millions of pilgrims who have made this same journey over the centuries. Behind you, the eternal flame continues to burn in the god's sanctuary, its light a reminder that some forms of illumination persist even in the deepest darkness. The flame represents not just Apollo's presence but the inextinguishable human drive toward understanding, the refusal to accept ignorance and confusion as the final word about the nature of existence. As you reach the bottom of the sacred way and look back up toward the temple complex silhouetted against the star-filled sky, you understand that your journey through Apollo's mythology has been more than just an exploration of ancient stories. It has been an investigation into the fundamental structures of consciousness itself, the eternal tensions between knowledge and mystery, order and chaos, individual desire and cosmic necessity that define all aware existence. Apollo's complex, contradictory nature reflects our own struggles to make sense of a universe that seems to offer both overwhelming meaning and ultimate meaninglessness, depending on the perspective from which we approach it. The gods' tragic relationships with mortals mirror our own experiences of love and loss, the way that our deepest connections often involve forms of transformation that we neither expect nor fully understand. His role as a bringer of both healing and plague reminds us that all genuine medicine involves a kind of controlled poison, all authentic growth requires the death of old forms of being. His function as a prophetic deity who speaks in riddles suggests that the most important truths cannot be communicated directly but must be discovered through the patient work of interpretation and reflection. In the end, Apollo's greatest gift to human consciousness may be his example of how to bear the burden of awareness without being crushed by it. Despite the loneliness and tragedy that seem to follow him through eternity, he continues to create beauty, to offer healing, to provide guidance for those who seek it. His music continues to harmonize the discord of existence, his light continues to illuminate the darkness of ignorance, his rational influence continues to provide structure for society struggling to balance individual freedom with collective responsibility. The stars above you seem to pulse with a light that echoes Apollo's own golden radiance, suggesting that the divine consciousness he represents is not confined to ancient temples but continues to manifest wherever human beings struggle to understand themselves and their place in the cosmic order. Tomorrow the sun will rise again, as it has every day since the world began, and with it will come new opportunities for the kind of conscious engagement with existence that Apollo's mythology celebrates and encourages. In this daily resurrection of light and possibility, we find our own form of immortality, not the literal deathlessness of the gods, but the more modest yet equally precious continuity of consciousness seeking always to know itself more fully, to love more deeply, and to create something beautiful from the raw materials of existence itself. Yet your journey through Apollo's realm is not quite complete, for there are still deeper mysteries to explore, hidden chambers in the god's nature that reveal themselves only to those who have already walked far enough to understand the terrible beauty of divine consciousness. You find yourself drawn to the sacred island of Tenedos, where Apollo's worship takes on a darker, more primitive aspect that seems to contradict everything you have learned about his civilizing influence. Here the god is honored not as the rational deity of light and music but as Smintheus, the destroyer of mice and bringer of plague, his arrows carrying death rather than illumination. The rituals performed in his honor on this windswept island seem to reach back to a time before Apollo's integration into the Olympian pantheon, when he was still a foreign deity whose power was feared rather than celebrated. You watch as his priests sacrifice white mice on blood-stained altars, their chant speaking of purification through destruction, of renewal that can only come through the complete annihilation of existing forms. This aspect of Apollo's nature forces you to confront the uncomfortable truth that underlies all divine consciousness, that creation and destruction are not opposite forces but different expressions of the same cosmic principle. The god who brings healing must also understand disease, the deity who creates harmony must also comprehend discord, the bringer of light must be intimately familiar with darkness. As you stand among the primitive stone circles of Tenedos, breathing air thick with incense and the smoke of burnt offerings, you realize that Apollo's civilized persona may be less a fundamental truth about his nature than a carefully constructed mask designed to make his more terrifying aspects bearable to mortal consciousness. The priests who serve Apollo Smintheus seem to understand this duality instinctively, their rituals acknowledging both the god's capacity for benevolence and his potential for devastating wrath. They speak of him not as a distant, perfect deity but as an immediate presence whose attention can bring either salvation or annihilation depending on factors that mortal minds cannot fully comprehend. Their prayers are negotiations rather than simple requests, careful attempts to bargain with a power that operates according to cosmic laws too complex for human understanding. As you observe these ancient rites, you begin to see how Apollo's later development as a god of rational thought and artistic beauty represents not an abandonment of his darker aspects but their integration into a more sophisticated understanding of divine nature. The harmony he creates through music becomes more meaningful when you understand his capacity for discord. His healing powers gain deeper significance when you recognize his intimate knowledge of disease and death. The rational order he brings to human society carries more weight when you realize it emerges from his mastery of the chaotic forces that can tear civilization apart. Your exploration of Apollo's shadow aspects leads you to the mysterious figure of Linus, the god's son whose story reveals yet another dimension of divine tragedy. You find yourself present at the birth of this divine child, watching as Apollo gazes upon his newborn son with a mixture of love and prophetic dread that speaks of knowledge too terrible to bear. Unlike his other children, who inherit specific aspects of their father's nature, Asclepius receiving healing powers, Orpheus gaining musical genius, Linus seems destined to embody something more fundamental and more dangerous. As the child grows, you see how his very existence appears to threaten the cosmic order that Apollo represents, his presence somehow disrupting the careful balance between divine and mortal realms. The death of Linus, when it comes, is unlike the dramatic transformations that characterize Apollo's other losses. There are no jealous winds or accidental javelins, no rejected loves or divine curses. Instead, the boy simply fades away, his divine essence too pure and too powerful to sustain itself in a world designed for imperfect beings. You watch Apollo cradle his dying son, seeing for the first time tears that contain no hope of transformation or redemption, only the pure grief of a consciousness forced to witness the destruction of something infinitely precious. The lament that Apollo sings over Linus's body becomes the archetype for all future expressions of loss and mourning, its melody so perfectly capturing the essence of irretrievable sorrow that it cannot be heard without breaking the hearts of all who listen. This encounter with ultimate loss transforms Apollo in ways that his previous tragedies could not, stripping away the last vestiges of the youthful optimism that once led him to believe divine love could somehow overcome the fundamental incompatibilities between immortal and mortal existence. You see how the death of Linus marks a turning point in the god's development, after which his relationships with mortals take on a more measured, more careful quality. He continues to love and to create and to heal, but always with the awareness that such activities carry within them the seeds of their own destruction. The philosophical implications of Linus's story extend far beyond Apollo's personal development to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of perfection and its relationship to existence itself. You realize that the boy's death represents not a tragic accident but a necessary consequence of absolute purity attempting to manifest in an imperfect world. Linus cannot survive because survival requires compromise, adaptation, the willingness to accept limitation that his divine perfection makes impossible. In this sense, his story becomes a meditation on the paradox of the ideal, that the very qualities that make something perfect also make it impossible to sustain in the realm of practical existence. Your journey through Apollo's mythology eventually brings you to his role in the great cosmic cycles that govern the rise and fall of civilizations. You find yourself witnessing the gradual decline of the Bronze Age cultures that first honored him, watching as the heroic world that produced figures like Achilles and Hector gives way to the more prosaic realities of Iron Age existence. Apollo's response to these changes reveals another aspect of his nature, his function as a guide for consciousness navigating the transitions between different phases of cultural development. The gods' oracles during this period speak not just to individual seekers but to entire societies struggling to understand their place in a rapidly changing world. You listen as the Pythia delivers prophecies that help Greek communities decide whether to establish new colonies, whether to engage in particular wars, how to interpret natural disasters and their implications for collective behavior. Apollo's guidance serves to ease the anxiety that accompanies all major transitions, providing divine sanction for decisions that might otherwise seem too risky or too radical for mortal leaders to pursue. Yet even this beneficent role carries its characteristic ambiguities. The prophecies that encourage Greek expansion also sanction the displacement and destruction of indigenous peoples, while the divine guidance that helps establish new cities also contributes to the conflicts that will eventually tear the Greek world apart. You begin to see how Apollo's gifts always carry within them the potential for both creation and destruction, how his light inevitably casts shadows even as it illuminates previously hidden possibilities. The mystery schools that develop around Apollo's worship during the later classical period represent sophisticated attempts to reconcile these contradictions through direct experience of divine consciousness. You find yourself participating in initiation rites that go far beyond the relatively simple ceremonies at Delphi, elaborate spiritual technologies designed to produce genuine encounters with the god's essential nature. The preparation involves years of study and practice, gradually purifying consciousness until it becomes capable of withstanding direct contact with divine awareness without being completely overwhelmed. The final initiation takes place in underground chambers where darkness and silence create conditions similar to those experienced by souls traveling through the underworld. You lie on a stone couch, your body paralyzed by sacred drugs while your consciousness expands beyond the boundaries of individual identity. In this state, you experience Apollo not as an external deity but as the principle of cosmic order that operates within your own awareness, the capacity for rational thought and aesthetic appreciation that connects finite minds to infinite intelligence. The vision that follows is both terrible and beautiful beyond description. You see the universe from Apollo's perspective, perceiving the vast web of cause and effect that connects all events across space and time. Individual lives appear as brief flickers of light in an endless cosmic dance, their apparent significance dwarfed by the immensity of the patterns they participate in creating. Yet paradoxically, this perspective also reveals the absolute importance of each individual moment, the way that every choice and every experience contribute something irreplaceable to the ongoing creation of reality. Most disturbing of all, you see your own life from this divine viewpoint, understanding for the first time how your personal history fits into larger narratives that you never suspected existed. The choices that seemed so important from your limited perspective reveal themselves as responses to cosmic influences operating far beyond your conscious awareness, while decisions you barely noticed turn out to have consequences that ripple across generations. The knowledge is simultaneously liberating and terrifying, liberating because it reveals the ultimate meaningfulness of existence, terrifying because it exposes the illusory nature of personal autonomy. When ordinary consciousness returns, you find yourself profoundly changed by the experience. The world appears simultaneously more beautiful and more fragile than before, its apparent solidity revealed as a temporary arrangement of forces that could dissolve at any moment. This new awareness brings with it a peculiar form of detachment, not the cold indifference of cynicism but the warm non-attachment of someone who has seen beyond the veil of appearances to the eternal patterns that give them meaning. The priests who guide you through the aftermath of initiation explain that this experience of divine consciousness represents both Apollo's greatest gift and his most dangerous offering. Those who receive it find themselves permanently alienated from ordinary human concerns, able to participate in social life but never again able to take its dramas entirely seriously. They become living bridges between mortal and divine awareness, capable of translating cosmic insights into human language but forever separated from the innocent engagement with existence that makes most people's lives bearable. This understanding helps explain the tragic quality that characterizes so many of Apollo's closest human associates. The prophets and artists who serve him most faithfully often pay for their gifts with forms of suffering that seem disproportionate to any obvious wrongdoing. Their tragedy lies not in divine punishment but in the natural consequence of consciousness expanded beyond the comfortable limits that normally protect mortal minds from overwhelming truth. You find yourself contemplating these mysteries as you visit the tomb of Pythagoras, the philosopher whose mathematical insights were said to derive directly from Apollo's teaching. The great sage's life exemplifies both the promise and the peril of too close association with divine consciousness. His discoveries about numerical harmony revolutionized human understanding of cosmic order, yet his personal existence was marked by the kind of isolation and misunderstanding that seems to accompany all genuine contact with divine truth. The Pythagorean communities that developed around his teaching represent perhaps the most sophisticated attempt to create social structures capable of supporting consciousness permanently altered by exposure to Apollo's influence. Their elaborate rules about diet, behavior, and spiritual practice were designed not as arbitrary restrictions but as practical technologies for maintaining the delicate balance required to function simultaneously in divine and human realms. You spend time among these philosophers, observing their daily routines and participating in their group meditations. Their lives seem to vibrate at a frequency slightly different from ordinary human existence, as if they were perpetually tuned to cosmic harmonies inaudible to less sensitive ears. Their conversations move effortlessly between practical concerns and metaphysical speculations, treating questions about the nature of reality with the same careful attention they bring to decisions about what to eat for dinner. Yet even this carefully regulated lifestyle cannot entirely protect them from the costs of heightened awareness. You see how many of the community members struggle with a peculiar form of melancholy, a sadness that seems to arise not from personal disappointment but from their clear perception of the gap between what existence could be and what it actually is. Their knowledge of cosmic harmony makes them acutely sensitive to the discord and suffering that characterize so much of mortal experience, while their understanding of eternal truths makes them painfully aware of the temporary nature of all earthly achievements. The mathematical discoveries that emerge from these communities reveal Apollo's influence in perhaps its purest form, insights that combine perfect logical rigor with aesthetic beauty so profound that they seem to illuminate the very structure of reality itself. You watch Pythagorean scholars work out the relationships between musical intervals and numerical ratios, their calculations revealing how the harmonies that please human ears correspond to mathematical proportions that govern the movements of celestial bodies. These discoveries carry implications far beyond their immediate applications, suggesting that the universe itself is constructed according to principles that finite minds can comprehend and appreciate. The possibility that reality might be fundamentally musical, that existence itself might be a kind of cosmic symphony whose movements can be understood through mathematical analysis, offers hope that consciousness and cosmos might not be fundamentally incompatible after all. Yet this hope comes with its own form of burden, for the more clearly these philosophers perceive the mathematical beauty underlying existence, the more painful becomes their awareness of humanity's general blindness to such truths. They find themselves in the position of people trying to describe color to the congenitally blind, possessing knowledge that could transform human existence if it could be communicated but lacking adequate means to share what they have discovered. As your exploration of Apollo's influence on human consciousness draws toward its final phase, you find yourself contemplating the god's relationship with the phenomenon of time itself, his unique position as a deity who embodies both temporal progression and eternal stability. His daily journey across the sky represents the fundamental rhythm that structures mortal existence, dividing experience into discrete units that can be measured and compared. Yet his prophetic knowledge transcends this linear progression, encompassing past, present, and future in a single divine perspective that makes ordinary temporal distinctions meaningless. This temporal paradox helps explain many of the apparent contradictions in Apollo's mythology. His simultaneous youth and ancient wisdom reflect the way divine consciousness experiences time, eternally present yet containing within itself the accumulated knowledge of all possible moments. His ability to love mortals despite knowing their inevitable fate speaks to a form of awareness that can embrace temporal experience without being limited by it. The oracular pronouncements that seem to predict the future may actually represent something more complex, not foreknowledge in the ordinary sense but insight into the logical patterns that connect present circumstances to their inevitable consequences. Apollo's prophecies succeed not because he can see across time but because he understands causation so completely that future developments become as visible to him as present conditions. This understanding transforms your perception of fate and free will, the philosophical problems that have puzzled mortals since consciousness first began reflecting on its own nature. You realize that these apparent opposites may be different perspectives on the same phenomenon, fate being the view from divine consciousness that perceives the logical necessity connecting all events, free will being the experience from mortal consciousness that must make choices without full knowledge of their implications. Apollo's tragic relationships with mortals may reflect not the incompatibility of divine and human nature but the inevitable consequences of bringing these different temporal perspectives into contact with each other. His lovers are destroyed not by divine malevolence but by exposure to forms of awareness that their finite consciousness cannot safely contain. As the first light of dawn begins to touch the eastern horizon, you find yourself standing once more in Apollo's temple at Delphi, but now the sacred space seems transformed by everything you have experienced during your long journey through the god's mythic landscape. The marble columns that once appeared simply as architectural achievements now reveal themselves as attempts to embody in stone the mathematical proportions that govern cosmic harmony. The famous inscription "Know thyself" no longer seems like philosophical advice but like a warning about the ultimate price of consciousness itself. The eternal flame that burns at the temple's heart takes on new significance as you contemplate Apollo's essential nature. Like consciousness itself, the flame consumes fuel to maintain its existence, transforming matter into light and heat through processes that seem to border on the miraculous. Its persistence depends on careful tending, constant renewal, the delicate balance of conditions that allow such an improbable phenomenon to sustain itself in a universe governed by entropy and decay. In this sacred fire, you see a symbol of everything Apollo represents, the principle of order that emerges from chaos, the capacity for beauty that arises from suffering, the possibility of meaning that persists despite the apparent meaninglessness of existence. The flame burns not because it is exempt from natural law but because it has learned to work with such laws, transforming the very forces that could destroy it into the energy that sustains its continued existence. As you prepare to conclude your journey through Apollo's realm, you carry with you a deeper understanding of what divine consciousness might actually represent. Not the arbitrary power of supernatural beings but the emergence of awareness capable of perceiving pattern and meaning in apparently random experience. Not the intervention of external agencies in human affairs but the recognition of cosmic principles that operate both within and beyond individual minds. Apollo's mythology suggests that such consciousness is both humanity's greatest achievement and its most dangerous possibility. To see clearly is to become responsible for what is seen, to understand fully is to lose the comfortable illusions that make ordinary existence bearable. Yet it is also to participate consciously in the ongoing creation of reality, to become a co-creator with the cosmic intelligence that Apollo represents. The sun rises as you make your final descent from the sacred mountain, its light transforming the landscape around you from the mysterious realm of shadows and possibilities into the familiar world of definite forms and practical concerns. Yet something of the divine perspective remains with you, a subtle alteration in the quality of your awareness that allows you to perceive the eternal patterns that operate beneath the surface of temporal experience. In this transformed vision, Apollo's greatest gift reveals itself not as any particular power or knowledge but as the capacity to hold paradox without being destroyed by it, to embrace both the beauty and the terror of conscious existence with equal appreciation. The god's own tragic nobility lies in his willingness to continue creating beauty and meaning despite his clear knowledge of their impermanence, his refusal to retreat into cynical detachment even when faced with the ultimate loneliness of perfect awareness. The morning air carries the promise of another day filled with ordinary miracles, the play of light on water, the sound of birds announcing their territories, the quiet satisfaction of consciousness recognizing itself in the patterns it perceives around it. In these simple phenomena, Apollo's presence continues to manifest, not as the intervention of an external deity but as the eternal possibility of awareness awakening to its own divine nature.